Hatton Garden on ITV. How accurate is heist drama based on real-life burglary? Who were the thieves? ITV's new 4-part drama is based on the true story of the April 2015 cash and jewellery heist in London's Diamond District. The burglary was Hey Race, what you need to know about the real-life story behind the drama. It was shortly after 9 p.m. on Thursday, April 2, 2015 when staff at the Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Limited locked the doors and headed off to enjoy the long Easter weekend. Down in the underground, the Ops gathered outside Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Limited soon after the staff had locked the doors and left. Ringleader Brian. The men were dressed as utility workers, with Reader in a yellow hard hat and a fluorescent jacket with the word gas, and immediately began unloading bags full of tools and equipment alongside multiple plastic wheelie bins for the goods. Police traced no. According to Detective Chief Inspector Paul Johnson of the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Flying Squad, forensic experts found no sign of forced entry on the outside of the building. It appears they had a key or some other means of accessing the premises. But once inside, the gang's alarms specialist Basil disabled the alarms, possibly using a jammer though this remains one of the big mysteries as it has never conclusively been established how this was done. We do know that but having made their way underground to the vault, the gang's next challenge was to get inside. According to the Met, the thieves decided to bypass the ultra-secure vault door and instead used a heavy-duty Hilti DD350 drill cost, approximate £3,500 to bore holes into the reinforced concrete wall, which is 2 meters thick. The plan was to drill. At 12:21 am, police at Scotland Yard were informed that an alarm had been triggered, but they did not respond, missing their chance to catch the thieves red-handed. The police later. At 8 am the gang left, empty-handed. But it was not over. While ringleader Brian Reader bailed, some of the group decided to make another attempt, and after a trip to the hardware store to buy a new pump and hose for the drill they returned to Hatton Garden. At the last moment, having already considered making a second attempt, one of the men had left the door slightly ajar so they could slip back in. But in the interim this time they toppled the metal cabinet, and some of the men slipped through the hole. They set to work at around 6:30 am, after raiding 72 or 73 boxes and taking goods worth between £14 million and £200 million. Estimates vary wildly. The men took the bins and cleared out. As a temporary solution, the gang left those loot-filled bins outside Kenny's house on a non-collection day, of course. Just as we see, the police arrived early on Tuesday morning after the bank holiday and found a scene of devastation. The Met set-inist, Brian Reader, who was 77 by the time of his conviction, was described as the Reader had been involved in the notorious Brinks Mat robbery in 1983, when a gang of armed and masked robbers burst into a warehouse, beat up and poured petrol over the security guards, and took a haul of gold and diamonds. He was one of the men. Terry Perkins, played by Timothy Spall, was another experienced criminal. He had been sentenced. Another gang member was Carl Wood, played by Jeff Bell. Then there was Danny. A more mysterious addition to the heist was Basil, later revealed to be a man named Michael C. He was the last. In the 6 weeks after the heist, police closed in. The men were identified from surveillance footage and from CCTV. While most cameras had been stolen or disabled, the gang had missed one above a fire exit. As investigation, the police finally conducted their raid when the men met at an address in Enfield to handle the stolen items. 9 suspects were arrested on May 19, 2015, and Basil was arrested on March 28, 2018. Ultimately, once in custody, Danny Jones offered to show the police where he had stashed his share of the loot. But even at this point, after a trial, 3 further men were convicted. Carl Wood and William Billy the Fish Lincoln were found guilty of conspiracy to commit burglary, and also of conspiracy to conceal, convert, or transfer criminal property, and jailed for 6 and 7 years respectively. Another man named Hugh Doyle was found guilty of concealing, converting, transferring criminal property and given a 21-month suspended sentence. Billy Lincoln's nephew. In March 2019, Michael Basil Seed was found guilty of conspiracy to burgle, and sentenced to 10 years in prison. He had been the final. The stolen goods have yet to be fully recovered, and many of the business owners, some of whom had not been able to afford insurance and had relied on the safe deposit boxes, had their livelihoods devastated. There. While the Metropolitan Police were not involved in the production, Pope and his team were able to call on Peter Spindler, the senior officer who had led the investigation, who now retired from the police and working as a consultant. They were also able. Hatton Garden introduces a character called Mr. Cyrus, played by Nasser Memarziayu, but while this character is based on real accounts from safety deposit box holders, he is not a real person. Writer Jeff Pope explains it's a very insular, very closed community, the Hatton Garden jewelry community, and so those victims that we spoke to didn't want us to use their names. So, we took the decision to create a composite character, which was the character that you see in episodes 1 and 2, and it plays out in 3 and 4. He's the moral through.
Raindrop, drop top, top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that.